Bana, do you blame President Assad for this?
Yes.
What is your message to President Assad?
I am very sad. A lot of died and no one helped them. The world is watching. The world doesn't do anything.
What do you want the world to do?
I want stop the war, and I want the children of Syria play and go to school, live in peace. Together we can help them. Together we can save them.
Bana, when you saw the video and the pictures of what happened in Syria this week, what did you think?
I am very sad about
All right, I can't take too much of it. Welcome to Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone. Please just notice that this is actually from CNN's official YouTube. That's why I was playing it from there. Yes, I had to double check it because I couldn't believe that that was real. Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone, and the Libertarian Institute. Today, I am so happy to be joined by Monica Perez. She is the co-host of the Propaganda Report podcast. Miss Perez, where is the best place to find your work?
thepropreport.com or my Twitter feed, which is at Monica Perez Show.
Terrific. All righty. So you and I each have about 10 to 15 experiments, or I shouldn't say that, techniques that the media uses in order to persuade the masses in unjust ways we could categorize as propaganda. Give me your first two techniques.
Bandwagoning, which is kind of the fear of missing out FOMO thing. Biden did it today. Hey kids, or young people, if you didn't want to get your vaccination, guess what? Now you can go to parties with other vaxxed people because we're telling you can take your masks off. So that's bandwagoning. It's the fear of missing out. Then there's loaded words like hater or conspiracy theorist, to make anybody who thinks one way or says one thing a whole in the basket of deplorables, if you will. But then it works the other way too. So you've got the healthcare heroes. So those are the loaded words that just trigger thoughts and emotions right off the bat.
Healthcare hero is rough because it's one of those words that almost kind of rhymes. No fly, no buy. Raise the minimum wage. It's so catchy. It's like, well, it's got to be true. I mean, can't fly in a plane, can't buy a gun, and it rhymes. Well, I guess we what we have to give into that. When you hear something like that, let's start with the bandwagon effect, and you are with some of your friends who might not be into this. Do you have any methods that you use to sort of communicate that, you know what, I get that I am not part of the popular group, apologies, but I also have a rational position to stand on? Do you try to ever convince them, or just show them the same disapproval back? How do you deal with it?
I try to appeal to critical reasoning and also past experiences and times when I've made observations that have been correct that they have regretted not following. Like that thing is bad for you. There have been a lot of medicines in the past that make people sick. And you can say, hey, that thing makes you sick. Like the vaccine. I was saying to people all along, because I was really keeping up with the literature and the trials and stuff, like this can have a, they tell people that there are that they ask you two questions. That's on one of the lists for the vaccines. Are you pregnant or are you on blood thinners? And I said, well, that's a little bit of a flag. So let's watch and see if there are any connection between vaccines and blood thinner or thickening issues. And that happened. So when Biden says something like that, I say, well, why don't we just wait a little while and see what happens like we did last time? And I would say once somebody there's basically, I think, three kinds of people or three categories in this case, people who absolutely question. They're like, yeah, you're right. People who do not question, like they get mad at you if you say that. They say, well, I'm getting the vaccine as soon as possible because, and this is another fallacy along the line, I don't want to I don't want to feed into anti-vax sentiment, which is evil. And that, so you've got those people, but in the middle, you have people who may still be open to reason. And you just ask them, like, what's the hurry? What's your risk? Like, let's think about a cost benefit analysis. Have you done the research? Can we just talk about that? That actually goes to another, I'll tell you, this isn't something for later in the show, but a lot of these things have overlapping fallacies on interlocking ways to deal with it. So you could go watch, my co-host Brad Binkley watches a lot of videos from the people who try to promote propaganda of the deed to get protesters out there, to cause confrontations with, make people, maybe somebody in a wheelchair causing confrontation with somebody they want to make look bad, that kind of thing. And you hear them telling their kind of soldiers how to react, what to say to somebody. And that's when kind of the bandwagoning and the loaded words kind of go together, because the loaded words, then you say, well, what are you, a hater? You want to kill grandma? That's how it, so I think those things all work together, and you have to just, you cannot deal with the people who are already completely brainwashed into one way of thinking. You have to see if there's anybody left with a hair of critical reasoning. And I'm not saying people who are anti-vaxxers, I don't care about them either. But if you're going to have that conversation about, is this propaganda? How do you get somebody out of brainwashing? And I don't care about vaxxers or anti-vaxxers at all. I really care about critical thinking and, of course, individual liberty.
Excellent points there. My first one is, whenever they say the news, this might be trivial, but here's what I think of it. So here is Jerry Seinfeld on Johnny Carson's show. He says, to me, the most amazing thing about the news is that whatever goes on in the world, it exactly fits the number of pages that they're using in the paper that day. I mean, I know they must just stand around after each edition going, I don't believe it. We just made it. Again, if one more thing happens, we're screwed. There is no more room on this paper. The joke is, well, they either selectively choose things to leave out, and in order to make things fit, they will push things that are not necessary in order for you to operate in the world. So it's not like there's bias and unbiased. There is only biased news. Even when you're watching this show, I choose to report on things that I'm passionate about and that I care about and push my ideas of self-ownership. So there's no such thing as unbiased. Whether I spend 1 second or thousands of hours talking about something, well, that is a bias of mine. By not reporting on, say, Abu Ghraib, Fox News is not, totally, they're not lying about it, but they're also not giving you an accurate worldview with regard to, say, foreign policy. Also, if that's the only thing you've ever talked about with regard to foreign policy, that's also bias. So just calling it the news as if there's one set of things that has happened, as opposed to, every time there's a shooting or whatever, you can say, well, there's about 163,000 deaths a day on planet Earth. Why are you focusing on this one? Like, I get Casey Anthony or O.J. Simpson, big events, very different. I could see that making it. But just these average ones, like in America alone, it's like 15,000 homicides a year. So every time they're choosing something, they're selecting that because it's their bias, just like I have mine. So once I saw that, and I sort of saw the press as just a different religious organization pushing the religion of statist progressivism, then it's like, it's just like the Church of Scientology. Are they actively lying? No, but they selectively choose to amplify some things, diminish others, and probably exaggerate their inner biases. And Don Lemon is just a high priest of socialism. What is your third and fourth propaganda item?
Okay, transfer is what they call one. I'm not sure, that may go a little bit with celebrity testimonial. I might have to say that those are two. So transfer is when I have an example from a book I like. It's called Government, the Biggest Scam in History. It's pretty funny. And it's just page after page of basically it's all propaganda techniques. It's all demonstrations and it compares like the USSR and Nazi Germany and East Germany and the US and the propaganda techniques they use. But he points out in that book that every Michael Bay movie at the end has some triumphant moment where the hero rises from the ashes. And every single time, basically, it cuts away to or has in the background the American flag. Mm-hmm. And that just takes the emotions that you just built up after 2 hours of watching that movie. And you really, I mean, I will cry at a Transformers movie. Like if it's done well, you know what I mean? You will get emotionally involved, whether you want to or not, whether it's a big old robot or not. And as you sit there really feeling this feeling of joy and gratitude and triumph and one with the moment, you see the US flag in the back. And they do that also with like the Confederate flag. So when I was growing up, I'm a Yankee, so I don't know from what the deeper meaning was, but to the extent people in my town listened to Southern rock or whatever, they would have Confederate flags. And I always thought it was just about states' rights. I understand that slavery was a states' rights issue, and I don't like that. That sucks and needs to be addressed. But I didn't think of the flag as a symbol of racism. But it now is a symbol of racism. And so if you put the Confederate flag behind a country singer, he's going to get canceled. Because that symbol has been so effective, and you can just, by putting it in the same frame, you can transfer that feeling of repugnance towards the person who stands near it. And then like a hand-in-hand one with that is a testimonial, or like a false testimonial. So you have, and this does go with the transference thing. So there's an example. Tom Hanks is like the perfect example of like somebody who goes out there and presents for the propaganda machine. So transference, he actually said it overtly. I believe it was in the Simpsons movie where he came out and they had some message and he said, the government has no credibility, so it's borrowing some of mine. I'm delivering this message to you on behalf of the U.S. government. And then he, whatever, said the message. But then you have, and this is something that also kind of goes with the loaded words thing, Dolly Parton, who's so sweet, and I've always loved her, making a little rhyme about how if you don't get the vaccine, you're a coward. So she uses loaded words, but she's also a celebrity. It's also like a de facto testimonial. She's getting the vaccine. It's safe to get the vaccine. Tom Hanks went and made a commencement speech at Wright University. Of course, it was virtual. And he was telling those kids that they were heroes, just like the greatest generation who gave their lives on the front lines for whatever propaganda message they were told, because they weren't even told about the Holocaust at that point. But whatever they were told was the message that made them the greatest generation, and they gave their lives and stuff. But these people are now walking in their footsteps because they did the courageous thing and stayed home. And like that sounds like, and actually that's another fallacy, which is called the false analogy. So I'm giving myself 3. I just used a third one. So yeah, I'm sorry, please. But it's a false analogy. Yeah,
you're right about how much overlap there is. It's not like this one is in this category and then everything else is totally different. And the good thing is once you're able to think clearly and see through all of these, you don't have to like remember the exact name of it. Once you see through the curtain, you're able to.
Oh yeah. Once my sister calls it TLM, think like Monica. As soon as like you take those scales off your eyes. And you're just like, oh, I get it. I know why Rogan said that about the vaccinations. I get that. He needs credibility. He's losing a little bit of credibility. He went to Spotify and they took a bunch of his old stuff down. But there are plenty of anti-vaxxers around. Him being a limited hangout, he came out recently and said, if I had a really healthy person, I might say, don't get it. You know, people are like, oh, it's like, but somebody gets to say that. Lots of people get to say that. They have to represent that part. And if they can include him in there, and that's another celebrity thing. That's another, but it's like a more sophisticated propaganda because it's a limited hangout. It's somebody, you can't have everybody who makes a lot of money in Hollywood saying the exact same thing. You have to have a Matthew McConaughey or Rogan or somebody in Texas saying something a little bit off, because remember, Texas is that place where some people still have Confederate flags behind them, but a lot of people have U.S. flags behind them. So that even a place can be a celebrity.
Of course, and that's why they get into things like COINTELPRO and PatCon, so they could be part of these resistance movements. That's just explicitly done on their end. You don't even have to speculate. My second one is, my name for this is word proximity. Now, that's a terrible name for what I'm about to describe, but what they will do is take something and just use other words to associate it with that thing in order to get you to not like the final thing. So 9/11 happens, an act of terrorism, Islamic terrorism, Al-Qaeda, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, North Korea. That's how they're able to sort of use these things. They'll be like, there are terrorists in the Middle East and Saddam has harbored them. Well, what does that even mean? You're just associating terrorism with Saddam after you first mentioned 9/11. Or they'll say something like, well, 9/11 happened and it'll be something like, well, we had to go into Afghanistan after 9/11. Well, what they should be saying is they already planned on going into Afghanistan as early as September 4th of 2001 with National Security Presidential Directive 9. So it's not like, that they just, something happened and then everyone was so confused and then they looked into it and then they were having vicious debates. Where should we go? How much time should we spend? The plan was already in action. So you don't get to say, I plan on having Monica on because I love the propaganda report, and then something happens 2 days from now and me saying, oh yeah, that was the reason I had her on. No, if I already planned and had an original justification, that was my justification. And the justification was to remove the Taliban. Obviously, that's still what they're talking about now. So the second example of word proximity, very dumb name. Please mention in the comments a better name for this.
Yeah.
They'll say, well, now back to domestic news. We're reporting about the rise in Asian hate crimes. Ever since Donald Trump had blamed China for the virus, there was a man who shot a number of Asian people on the story now. So what they did is they say Trump started the Kung flu, Wuhan virus word. And then this is causing people to do that when they were totally unrelated. He had, gone in there because he thought the massage parlor was taking advantage of him so he could get, intimate services there, whatever. But so they lie without explicitly lying. That is word proximity. Monica, what are your fourth and fifth examples of how the media is able to control the masses with propaganda methods?
I'm going to go with, I have to go back to false analogy because I didn't give my real example. My real example of the false analogy was recently, there was, and this, several people made this example to me, even though I had seen it like on TikTok or something. So I knew that it was like the September 4th effect or whatever, where it was already in the works and people are telling me as if they've thought of it. And it was young women saying, hey, I should worry about the vax. You would not believe the things I put in my body, like birth control. And my answer is, you do a cost-benefit analysis with birth control. The problem with the vaccine is that for the women is that we have not yet completed that cost-benefit analysis. And it's not, and so until you know the actual cost and the actual benefits quantifiably, which you do basically, I think, with the birth control, it's not the same thing because one has greater risk than the other or unclear benefits. And so they set that up so you can say, oh yeah, right, it's no worse than birth control. It's like, well, you really don't know. You really don't know the answer. That's a quantifiable question. And so I just felt like false analogy was something that you see all the time. And that was the thing with Tom Hanks and You're the Greatest Generation because you're sitting on the couch. Another one was snob appeal. So, or like hero complex, maybe you want to call it, where a lot of people will say, you don't know anything about science because you're just a dumbass hick. and whatever. So the rural America voted for Trump, and they really need to have internet because, like, Wi-Fi, because we have to expand internet, broadband access to the rural America because they're so stupid. And if they weren't so stupid, they would understand the science behind all these policies that, by the way, the science keeps changing, but then you're a conspiracy theorist if you don't like the science. And then on the right, you have, I'm saving children from pedophiles, and Trump is Batman, so like it's not the snob aspect of it, but it's similar in that you're the hero in the story. And just by saying that, even though stopping pedophiles isn't within the responsibility or the power of the executive of the federal government, it's a criminal thing. And I actually don't even think the Department of Justice is. I think it's obviously unconstitutional. But to the extent that people were proud of their support of Trump because he was going to save the world from pedophiles, that is this idea that you are the hero. You are doing something so grand that it cannot be questioned. But you have to then go into, is he really saving the world from pedophiles? Who are the pedophiles? Where are they? What is his plan? What is the time frame here? What is he not doing when he's spending his time and effort? What is he giving up? What is he trading off? Is that why we got $4 trillion deficits? But it's emotional, so you don't get into that. That's what all of this stuff is. All of it is exploiting emotions at the expense of critical thinking.
Yeah, he also wished Ghislaine Maxwell good luck after she was arrested. Not exactly what I would like to hear. what exactly what I would like to hear if I was a Trump supporter or maybe even a victim of the Maxwell crime syndicate. How about the FBI raiding Epstein's Manhattan residence a year ago, and we still don't have anything? Even though, according to Virginia Roberts, there was hidden cameras everywhere, and he used it for blackmail. Even the woman from ABC, Amy Robach, said when she looked into it, she's like, yeah, he was running a blackmail operation. But we still aren't. Still, I'm sure they're just about to let us in on what they found a year ago.
Ghislaine? I think we will never see a picture of Ghislaine Maxwell alive again. I'm not saying she's not alive. I'm just saying we haven't seen one in years. I bet you think that you've seen pictures of her. For years, we haven't seen a new picture of her.
A new picture. You know what?
We haven't seen a picture of her taken in the past 2 years. I'm going to put that in your head, and you're going to notice it. It's like my son, I think it's called the Bader-Meinhof thing, but whatever. You're going to now observe it because I put it in your head, but you're going to observe it. You're not going to find anything taken since this time of year in 2019 at the latest.
Well, hey, that thank you for giving us at least a falsifiable hypothesis. Because we just saw the other one the other day of her and Epstein at a Bill Clinton fundraiser, or I think it was like at the White House. It was at the White House, and they're all smiling, and there's that guy in the background laughing. It's like, does he know what's going on? I go, well, now I'm just making stories up in my mind to make this bigger than it probably is, but just to see how close it is. And these are the people telling us, without them, there'd be chaos, and we're kind of dumb and primitive, so we need them to constantly regulate us and cage us for victimless crimes.
Those guys. But where's that picture been all these years?
Yeah.
When they were pushing the Trump narrative, that's what Binkley brought to the show today. He was like, don't tell me that Epstein was a Trump thing. I'm like, yeah, well, that's why they didn't bring that picture out, because they needed to make it seem like it was as Trump as it was Clinton.
Unreal. My third one is called Unobtainable Perfection. I'm quoting from Madsen Prairie in The Use and Abuse of Logic, How to Win Every Argument. When the arguments for and against courses of action are assessed, it is important to remember that the choice has to be made from the available alternatives. All of them might be criticized for their imperfections, as might the status quo. Unless one of the options is perfect, the imperfections of others are insufficient grounds for rejection. The fallacy of unobtainable perfection is committed when the lack of perfection is urged as a basis for rejection, even though none of the alternatives is perfect either. So I just saw this yesterday. Paul Krugman's tweet went viral when he said, "The woman who debunked the myth of the free market." It's such a clickbaity thing, and the worst part is I clicked on it on the New York Times. And
Well, that's your job.
And right after I clicked, I go, "Dang it, the Wayback Machine! I could have used that without giving them a click."
I don't have the time to avoid that stuff. I'm with you.
Yeah. Okay. So what they had said was that you see. There are people who think that, there's like this perfect free market, but there isn't. Okay, first of all, who is saying that it's perfect? Because I've done a lot of research with the Austrians and the Chicago School and the minarchists and the objectivists, and I've never heard the word perfect. I've heard fascinating. I've heard greatly innovative. I've heard way better than the alternatives. But if I ever heard perfect, I'd know that someone was lying, just because markets are full of people and people are imperfect.
Right, define it. Maybe that is perfect.
So the article says that what happens is you actually have imperfect competition. Therefore, the state has the right to regulate industries because, markets are imperfect. Every single thing on earth is imperfect. So yes, right. Markets are imperfect. You know who else are imperfect? The regulators and the politicians who are giving us the regulatory information in the first place. So every human being on the planet is imperfect, and their criticism is that something is imperfect.
And you actually have to define the term in order to establish what perfect would be. And isn't it perfect that human beings are so different?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's the equivalent of me saying, "Monica, I have it on good authority that you are imperfect. Therefore, I have the right to rule you. And if you're not, if I catch you not obeying my edicts, my employees are going to cage you and shoot you if you resist."
Because they can make me a better Monica than I can make me. Exactly. I think I'm the perfect Monica because I'm the only possible Monica.
Exactly. See, you need to feel really insecure, but I need to have such confidence that I know it's right for millions of strangers who I've never even met. See, you don't have that much info. I have so much info that anyone who disobeys me should be caged. So it was just all over. He kept saying imperfect competition, the fallible marketplace. Yes, it is fallible, as is everything else on planet Earth. I'm trying to remember if there was anything else. Oh, their criticism. I forgot what the main criticism was. I was so pissed off. The main criticism, if you're driving in a car, pull over because for your own safety. you might swerve into oncoming. Their claim was that there could potentially be monopolies in the absence of a state. So just quickly, the government's the number one cause of regulation, which gives us fewer options, which creates oligopolies, and the state itself is a monopoly on taxation and regulation and issuing the money supply. So the article just could not have been worse. Sorry for that long rant. Please.
No, I have to. Too many. You stimulate my thoughts too much. First of all, I don't think there can be any monopolies outside of the government, and I'll tell you why. There's no such thing as natural monopoly. Because in order to define a monopoly, there have to be no substitutes. There's always a substitute for everything until you get to the point of necessities which are not scarce, like food, water, whatever. If somebody can you imagine a natural state where there is a monopoly, a worldwide monopoly on food? A natural state where there's a worldwide monopoly on food. It's just it just grows up unbidden from the ground. So you'd have to use force, and that's government. So I would say, you can't have a monopoly movie theater because television is an alternative, or playing badminton. You can't have a monopoly on roads because, just walk or don't go there or grow a potato. You don't have to have those things. You know
exactly.
what I mean? You don't have to have them. You're not going to die without them. So therefore, people aren't forced to use them unless they are.
Yeah, and as the price increases or the quality decreases, people will use substitutes. The best example is Lawrence Reed, the current president emeritus of FEE, says that there was a lot of claiming that the cereal industry was a monopoly. Well, a monopoly on what? breakfast?
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
And then you go, all right, we're going to go around. Everyone tell me what they had for breakfast today. Bacon? Okay, competition. You.
I would
Eggs?
never
Oh,
eat cereal.
competition. Oatmeal? Competition. Oh, you don't eat breakfast? Oh, well, then they're going out of business. That's even better. So,
Exactly.
ridiculous.
And I have one little thing for you to put in your lexicon is Albert J. Nock in Our Enemy, the State. He makes your point that, and this was from the 30s, he said, if you do a bad job handling your finances, the government wants to come in and regulate banking. The government, which has a track record of being the worst with financial self-regulation in the history of humanity. Like nothing could be worse than government for managing finances. If that's truly what they say they're going to do, it's very clear that they're not going to do it intentionally or unintentionally. So he talks about the bankers. But what's funny is if you read Our Enemy, the State, which is very short, it's from the 30s, and it really describes everything that happens right now. So I recommend
it. I'm going to have to reread it. I remember he did a great job of explaining the difference between society and the state.
State and government.
Which was just so hard for me to grasp before I got into politics at all. And even today, you hear it's like, is China our friend or not? I go, all right, is China the name? Are you talking about Black China, Rob Kardashian's ex-girlfriend, or a billion people? Okay, a billion people. Well, we're going to have to break that down then. What are your fifth and sixth example of propaganda methods?
Okay, I'm going to say these kind of go with yours a little bit. The least of evils. So, and there are two kind of related things. Least of evils. So when you're voting, you vote Democrat or Republican, because what would happen if you voted for the wrong evil? Well, a worse evil would happen, such as either, abortion rights would be taken away, or abortion would not be taken away, or gun rights would be taken or not to be taken away. So if you get down to those like single issues, you can convince people that they must vote for a Republican or a Democrat, because you only have a choice between evils. And I think that goes a little bit with your perfect thing. And then the other one that's kind of similar is the either or fallacy. So someone said to my young son once, before he probably even really fully grasps the names of these words, are you a feminist or a misogynist?
Nice. Well done.
And he was like, I'm definitely neither. And the guy was like, yeah, you're one or the other. And he just asked me, like, do I have to be one or the other? I said, no, you definitely do not. So that was the either or fallacy. And I think we hear that a lot. Like, here's one, I don't even know exactly what category to put it in, but do Black lives matter or do all lives matter? Like, how do you answer that question? Like, it's a crazy question. So, I mean, it's a setup, obviously. It's a trap of a question. And I feel like it falls into that you're forced to give an answer that does not express like the nuances of bigger issues. They try to jam issues into words, and that brings you to loaded words and snob appeal, like the Black Lives Matter, like whichever answer you demonstrate which category you're in, sophisticated or hayseed symbolism, like it all goes together. Are you in the basket of deplorables? Whatever. So
we might have to start using that one. Are you for voluntarism or enslavement? I just have I have a notepad with me, and I just want to mark you down. I want to know which box I should check next to your name.
That's great. Oh my gosh, we do need to start using that one.
My next one is repetition and avoiding the root. So I had Chase Hughes of the behavior panel on my show, and he said if I could describe mind control in one word, it would be repetition. Now, think of how they will constantly, I promise this is the last time I'll ever bring up this example, but it's so on point. There's a comedian who's like, I thought quicksand would be a much bigger problem when I was a child, and now that I'm an adult, I've never run into it. In other words, No one ever said, watch out for quicksand. You're probably going to run into it 2 or 3 times a week. They just kept showing us again and again and again. And we assumed it was a problem because we never really thought about it. Well, how about today? Is there anything you keep hearing about again and again and again and again? But how often do you hear about tuberculosis deaths? Or is there a cancer death?
Terrorism.
Is there a, suicide death count? Is there a homicide death count? Of course, it happens with police interactions with civilians. So they'll keep saying, "Oh, there was another shooting. A quick, right. LeBron James, tell us how to respond." Well, there's 15,000 homicides a year, as I mentioned earlier. Why is this one so vital? And why are they only mentioning a certain? Dennis Prager brought up a great point. First time for everything. He said that why don't we even know the name of the African-American police officer who shot and killed Ashley Babbitt? Now, was she breaking the law? Yeah, but so was George Floyd. Eric Garner was breaking the law. So what? Does that give them the justification to kill? So the point is that, again, they're using this sort of repetition so they can avoid the root. And the main problem is police claim the right to rule innocent people and initiate violence against them because of the badge-wearing group called statism. So they also did this with democracy, unfortunately. They said the monarch is terrible. Therefore, because we don't vote, we need to vote. Well, you're avoiding the root. The root problem is the monopoly on defense provision and the initiation of aggression, not the fact that we don't get to vote. But they love to issue in fake solutions that won't actually solve anything. So, of course, deaths like Ashley Babbitt, Duncan Lepp, Kelly Thomas, John Hendrick, Tyler Hayes, John DeWay, all of those get ignored so they can push the repetition mind control agenda. What are your 7th and 8th examples?
I think they're my 9th and 10th.
Oh, are they your 9th and 10th? I apologize.
6, 7, 8. Yeah, only because I'm running out.
Okay. Yep. What are your next 2 examples?
I have vague terms, which I think also goes under the name of glittering generalities. And we see that all the time. We saw it with Obama. I used to say, he says absolutely nothing. Hope and change means nothing. I used to call it the phenomenon of the psychic paper. Do you remember Doctor Who? He would hold up, it was called psychic paper. And his badge, like, you see Mulder holds up an FBI badge. Well, Doctor Who would hold up a badge, but it was just a blank piece of paper, like a whiteboard. And you would project onto it. You would see with your eyes what he just told you he was. So I felt like people listening to Obama who never voted in the Senate and used to say hope and change, they would just project onto him what they wanted to believe about him. And that's where vague term, and Trump did the exact opposite, but with the exact same effect. So I used to call his method the art of ambiguity. So his book was called The Art of the Deal, but his opening salvo to launch his campaign basically said, now people get mad at me because they're like, you're not quoting him correctly. I'm not quoting him, but the propaganda message, the propaganda nugget that he delivered that day was Mexicans are rapists and also nice people. So then you have this art of ambiguity. So everybody on the left was like, did you just call Mexicans racists? And everybody on the right was like, he said some of them were nice people. He's only calling rapists rapists. And that's how his entire presidency was him saying 2 things vaguely. Like he would say basically the opposite thing at the same time in vague enough terms so that whatever you wanted to project onto his meaning, you actually had a soundbite to prove your point. And then you had the problem of like, it's totally out of context, which is fine if that were something that people really held a standard to, but you don't. It's all about sound bites. And then you have to wonder if this guy has ever watched television. And we know he has, right? So does he not understand how sound bites work? Do you really want to say Mexicans are racists, rapists, and then later say some of them aren't? Like that's nobody would die. I don't even want to say that to you because what I did was create that clip. But
Yeah, really.
we're in a safe space. But I just that vague terms was a big one. And then card stacking, and I think that goes with kind of faulty cause and effect. I know you probably don't. It's probably not the greatest thing that I'm using only current examples because they're all still charged. I could go back and use other examples, but they're so top of mind. But card stacking is when you cherry pick or distort data to prove your point. And it goes, I think, hand in hand with the faulty cause and effect thing in my example, which is the other fallacy. My last fallacy is faulty cause and effect relationship. And so I read the most recent trials, the most final trial, like phase 2 trial, whatever it was, of Pfizer and Moderna when they were authorized for emergency use by the FDA. And it was amazing to me because there were, in both trials put together, there were 80,000 people, 15 each, the vaccine group and the control group in the Moderna one, and the Pfizer one had over 20,000 in each group. And of those, like 80,000 people, half of them did not get the vaccine. So we're talking like 40,000 people did not get the vaccine. Only one person of all that 80,000 people died of COVID, whether they got vaccine or not. And we're told it's safe and efficacious against preventing deaths from COVID. But I think it's because those trials cherry-picked the participants, and it said there, we're only picking participants who are healthy and in a very low-risk category for COVID. It didn't say very low risk, but when it told the parameters. Then the first group they rolled it out to were high-risk people, not in those trials. But they used safety and efficacy things of a cherry-picked trial to say there is no cause and effect relationship between, there's no side effects, which is a cause and effect, because they were, or nothing so serious. And I would just say that has been rampant in this changing science. And I'm not taking a position on the science. My big position is it changes all the time. And that's where the SPARS document that I wanted to tell you about comes in. Just one sentence being that they actually did a study, Johns Hopkins in 2017, that people have cited as being like so prescient about like the COVID thing. It's just so many of the scenario elements were true in COVID. But if you look at what that SPARS document was, it was a propaganda exercise to see what happens in the real world when you have to keep the propaganda machine effective under certain circumstances, one of which, it has like 20 different things, one of which is where the science is unclear or ever-changing or contradictory or not applicable or unavailable. How do you handle that from a propaganda point of view? So I feel like these were actually elements that they wanted to observe in real life to practice propaganda. Regardless of what you think of COVID, they're definitely using propaganda and observing how it's working. And one of the ways is by using science that's moving around or not strictly applicable. Cherry picking is one of those ways.
Yeah, and even when something is true, like, look, there is gun violence and regular violence, and there is terrorism, and I will admit the climate does change. What they do is they take a real example and then give you the ultimate non sequitur. X exists. Therefore, we have the right to usher in the solution. We know what the cause is, and we know how much funding we need, and you can't opt out of funding it. And we're going to usher in the solution, and anyone who opts out, of course, straight to jail. That's a lot of assumptions, but all they have to do once they get you in that way of thinking is just another problem: monopolies, problem; terrorism, problem; gun violence, problem; but people spreading misinformation, problem. And your head already goes to, well, what's the state going to do about it? Which is obvious propaganda, because you only think that way about one organization. Like if you always thought, your dad has to come in and do and save the day, or the Catholic Church is the only group that can come in and save the day, and no one can opt out of funding the Catholic Church. Well, you didn't come to that rationally. You just have an unreasonable double standard there. My final one is appeal to. This is another one I'm going to need help naming. Appeal to existence. They will just say something or a group exists as though they're making any sort of, important statement. Many have been asking, okay, whatever comes after, many have been asking. A lot of people ask a lot of things. What they're trying to do is make it seem like this isn't me just selecting something to report about because I want to tell you. There's a lot of people asking. Experts have said, well, hold on. Whatever you're about to say, experts have said a lot of things. And let's just take the article that I read that Paul Krugman, he didn't write it, but he was pimping it hard on Twitter. He had said, as many experts today say, what we need government regulation. Well, many experts say we don't. Why? I mean, what? I could name them. You had mentioned the myth of natural monopoly, which is the name of Tom DeLorenzo's refutation of this nonsensical theory.
No way.
Yeah. Tom DeLorenzo wrote The Real Lincoln and
I read that.
Capitalism Saved America. And his short essay is called The Myth of Natural Monopoly. That will be in the show notes, both in the description of this video. I will forget that, so I gotta write that down. Along with that study that you had mentioned. Both of those will be there. But yeah, they'll say many people have been wondering X, or a lot of people have been having this sort of reaction to what was said tonight. Well, there's a lot of people across the spectrum on a lot of things. Democrats, Republicans, syndicalists, fascists, and everything. So the fact that they're saying a demographic exists and is asking this question, a lot of demographics ask a lot of questions. You're obviously just trying to put the veil of popularity over whatever you're wanting us to talk about. Doesn't fool me. Doesn't fool Monica Perez. Is there anything else that you have before we? There's two people I want to ask you about. Do you have any other methods that come to mind?
I don't think so, but I had one reaction to your appeal to existence.
Please.
I absolutely love the name. I think you should keep that. And it reminded me of when, I guess, ISIS first emerged. I don't know if you remember this. It was a really long time ago. And they said we need to go in, like on the border between Syria and Iraq or something like that, because ISIS has trapped these mountain people, the Yazidi, I think they were called. Do you remember that? The Yazidi? There was this little tiny mountain people group, I think, and they're like, we have to get in there and save them. It was really kind of crazy. And I did a little research on this tiny little group on the border between Iraq and Syria. I think it was tiny. I said this on the air, and somebody immediately called me and said, those people, I'm Yazidi, and those people are really suffering. And I realized in retrospect that was definitely a troll, because I was on a big radio station. They had to tamp that stuff down. Like somebody always listening to that radio station. And they were this religious group. So the Christians or whatever, like our like the conservatives who have to justify the wars over there, they literally worship an angel called Shaitan that we call Satan, but they just don't think he's bad. So they think Lucifer didn't really fall, that he's, an okay, whatever. And I'm like, okay, I don't really know anything about these guys, but nobody's explaining their whole Shaitan thing. And if we're going to go sacrifice American lives to save these embattled people, should we know a little bit more about this whole Shaitan worship? But they existed. Therefore, it justified us sending an unlimited amount of people for an unlimited amount of time to some other countries where everybody between us and these cities might view it as an invasion. I don't know. But they exist, and therefore...
Well, the very first video I played here of Bana Alabad, that was in response to, Assad's atrocities. They got a 7-year-old for foreign policy. They got like a 12-year-old Greta for climate change. For gun control, they
Yes.
have 13-year-old David Hogg, however old he is.
Yes,
So I mean, this is just so unbelievable what they put in front of us. I just want to ask you about two people. What is the most important thing you learned from the work of Edward Bernays?
I would say that one of his tenets was that you had to quote, I believe this is a quote, contaminate the news at its source. So you probably can't buy off, this was very old, this writing. He said, you probably can't buy off the New York Times. Like, they have to believe, those guys really, they're true believers in themselves. They need to be unbiased. They think they're unbiased. So you need to actually create a news event that makes your point, that they can't resist but put on those limited pages that Seinfeld, it will pass any test of curation just on its face as a news story. But if it would never actually have happened organically, you created it and then it came across as news, that's propaganda, probably of deed and word. And he says, but like with magazines, it's a lot easier, because if you have a women's magazine and you're a bank, all you have to do is go to the editor with a story that teaches women how to balance their own checkbook. And then they're like, I get it. You're a bank. You know how to do that. You're giving me the story. I'll take it. But you couldn't actually do it like that with New York Times. But both of those are contaminating the news at its source. And I think if people understood that that's been the strategy for, possibly 100 years, then they wouldn't believe that stuff so much anymore.
Great points. There was another one you and I have spoken about, Jacques Ellul. What is the most important thing you learned from or contribution of Jacques Ellul?
There are there's a lot, but I will give you just the one answer to your question. But before that, we had talked about what are propaganda techniques that are used to control the masses. And that's what we brought. In reading something a little bit obscure by Ellul, because it's in his critique of technology, but he has a section on propaganda, just as like a last after effect, that he points out that the masses themselves had to be created. First, you had to create those masses. To create, I think what he called like a universal psychism, which is a funny word. I've only heard it once or twice before, but like, if you have to address each person's psyche individually, it'll never work. But if you can create a masses, then you can, and they have one universal psychism, then you can just address that with propaganda. So first, before propaganda will work, first you have to create those masses. And then he says that you need to replace the critical faculty with collective passion.
That is so true.
Right. And that's where it all comes down, and everything really flows from that. Then you have them in the palm of your hand.
Yeah, it's funny that people always telling us to be objective and look at the science are the most emotional, irrational people who get worked up about absolute nonsense.
That's a concept that he includes in this, is that you have to create a sacred and a profane. The sacred is stuff that cannot be questioned, and the profane is something that cannot be discussed. So you're anti-science, like science is sacred, or you're a racist, like you can't talk about states' rights because you're a racist. It's profanity. You can't speak it. And so like there are a lot of subcategories there that are meant to transform your critical faculty into emotion. And it seems to me that it really has very little to do with intelligence, like IQ, I actually feel like it's inversely correlated with the prestige of your education. So I think I'm an exception. I have a pretty bitchin' list of credentials, but that's how I know a lot of people with those same credentials that you try to explain stuff to them and they don't like it. I think because it's like when you try to tell somebody who's gotten the vaccine that there are risks that were not disclosed. If you tell somebody who's fully invested in the system, say works at a bank that engages in unscrupulous practices with regard to other countries and their populations, if somebody's in this for 20 years, dedicated their whole lives, probably ran through a couple of divorces or whatever, has a big pile of cash, they are absolutely not going to want to hear that the system itself is built on some lies, like the word capitalism. That it's so easily to bastardize it because capital itself has been so badly bastardized. Capital, to me, capital was in that it was a store of value. It was a way to store surplus labor, to invest in things that could be measured in the same way, like objective, equal, quantifiable, whatever. But once you take that away and make the fiat currency and all that, capital itself is bastardized. So these words that are on the basis of people's beliefs are what keep them entranced while they're working to death. But then they really aren't open to questioning those assumptions. So I feel like the propaganda gets them, especially when they're young, gets them to go down a path, and eventually they reach the point of no return. And part of what Alil says is that part of propaganda, that you must get it to the point where it is so pervasive, so totally saturating that it's like water in a fish tank. Like the fish do not know it's there. You cannot know it's there. And once you don't know it's there, you really can't live without it.
And that is probably a better example of word proximity that I should have used. If you're not able to define a term, well, you're just going to get taken to the woodshed, more or less. Because if you say capitalism, that's where I define it as tall buildings, employers, banks,
Right.
and money. Well, all of those could exist under syndicalism, fascism, communism. What is it unique about capitalism? Capitalism is, oh gosh, I want to say Rockefeller. That's a person. Or even when socialists will say, it's when the workers own the means of production. Are you implying entrepreneurs don't work? Let me tell you, they do some of the longest unpaid amounts of work that you'll ever come across. Or it's when the people control the means of production. What under capitalism do the animals, do the fish, do the clouds? It's always the people controlling the means of production. So unless you're able to, properly define it as a social system based on the explicit recognition of private property and voluntary contracts, well, then you're just going to get finished. You were on Molyneux's show, and Molyneux said one time that, yeah, all the world's problems could be solved in 15 minutes if people would just admit they're wrong and define their terms. And then he just moved on, and I go, that
Wow.
is so, it took me so long to appreciate that many people talk on different levels.
I would go before that, even with capital. I don't even think you have to go that far. I think capital and capitalism, I think that and maybe this was a Hoppe concept, I don't know, but that cost accounting, this is going to sound grand, but cost accounting is the source of all wealth. That until you can understand the actual exact relative value of your inputs, you would not know how to allocate resources. And without really knowing the comparative value of how to allocate resources, you wouldn't know how to invest the product of your surplus. And I would say that ability to have an objective measure that could be applied to all sorts of surplus, and then how to re-employ that in my opinion is the essence of capitalism, and that is what capital is, and everything else will come out of that. But once you introduce the state, that's why I'm an anarcho-capitalist, although the capitalism, they've bastardized the term, But that's why once you introduce the state, you interfere with that perfection.
Exactly, and that's another important reason for definitions is people like Sheldon Richman, my colleague at the Libertarian Institute. He hates the C word. He'll say, my goal is to abolish capitalism, and you ask him, and you ask him his definition, and he says, well, a large number of property owners working with the state to aggress against the populace, and it's like, okay, so what if? And then you can just give an example. I offer Monica Perez a job to work at my house. Do you or any other committee, any group have the right to stop that from happening if I profit off of our arrangement? And he says no. And then you go, okay, well, we just stopped a potential civil war. So we're fine.
And I would go further
fine.
than that and say you could even make as a job requirement that I sleep with you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you could make that as a job requirement. I don't have to take the job,
Sometimes you really have to push them in order to see if they're really on your side. And once they are, once you're on that same page, well, then you don't have to have this eternal fight. The agorists versus the ANCAPs versus the versus the objectivists.
It's so difficult.
There's so much time that can be saved if we just sort of recognize this, and we'll say, okay, well, what happens when we talk to people in different languages who don't have these words? Well, so long as we understand the concepts, we're not going to get into any trouble. How did you become an ANCAP, by the way?
Oh, I had just an epiphany that our experiments, I remember literally like vacuuming the rug and 15 years ago, whatever it was. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I think George Bush was president, and he signed the curly light bulb bill. Like I couldn't have light bulbs anymore. Like they said it wasn't going to happen for a while, but I knew, and I was like, wow, okay. So the American experiment is over. This is clearly no matter where you start, if you put a seat of power, it will be exploited and there's nothing you can do. And I got kind of depressed about it. And I stumbled upon a Lou Rockwell interview with Hans Hermann Hoppe about Democracy, the God That Failed. And I was like, couldn't believe it. I thought, so I was totally depressed because self-limiting government is the utopian fantasy, not liberty. But so I was, that was my thing. And then I realized when he said like society was self-ordering, it was so obvious because I was a waitress for a long time and you really don't get paid. So you get like $1, $2 an hour. And then once they started taxing that, your paycheck is literally zero. And there's no requirement for anyone legal or even at the restaurant to ever give you a tip, ever. There's nothing you can do about it if they don't. And in all my years, I was a waitress for like 7 or 8 years, sometimes 6 nights a week. Maybe twice. I can't even remember twice ever anyone not paying because they're with people and they want to come back. And if they did, then we would probably have a different system in place. We would have not had a tipping system probably, but it totally worked perfectly. And that was anarcho-capitalism because they knew that the social element there, it was a restaurant they enjoyed because of the people there and the people they were with, and they wanted respect. They respected, some of them came from a moral position. I would never have somebody work for me and not pay. I never, ever had that problem. And I knew right then and there, society is self-ordering. And people say, who will build the roads? Well, if somebody's building an apartment building and somebody else is building a mall, I have a feeling you're going to get a road. I don't know. So
you're able to build something as complex as apartments, which like would have blown the minds of all cavemen. And then they're like, all right, how do we have that flat tar? Wait, there's not a government. Did no one write down how to do this?
This is what I said.
And you gotta paint it. Oh, okay, forget it. We're done. We're done.
Man did not come out of the trees because government lured him down. First he came down out of the trees, then he built stuff. And of course, the caveman built a road to the lake. It's just with his feet, but it just emerged organically.
Well, there's that great meme of there's just like a path in the woods and they go, the deers had a government, or the deer had a government. Clearly, look, a path exists. Therefore, some had the right to rule others.
Exactly.
And just one final one. What are some of your favorite books? And I asked people to pick one that you'd recommend to everyone, and then just list your other favorites.
Pick one that I would recommend to everyone. Oh my gosh, would not
Because if we give them too many, that it's the
yeah,
paradox
no,
of
I
choice.
know,
And
but
others
you're
go,
asking
I don't have
me.
time.
You're asking me to pick one. So let me think. I wish I could look behind that curtain, but the curtain will fall down if I open it up. I would love to. Oh, no. The one I want to recommend is too hot to handle. So I can't recommend it.
It's too much of a red pill. You got to get them in gradually.
It would be controversial. I'll tell you. And if you want to put it in the show notes, you can put it in the show notes. So Bastiat's the Law.
Yeah.
I would give people Bastiat's the Law because I read it once. I discovered it. I called my aunt because I knew my father's dead, but my aunt wasn't. And I knew that my dad would have loved it and she would have loved it. And I called her and I said, Aunt Margaret, I have to tell you that I just read this book, The Law by Bastiat. It's so great. And it was funny because when she was first married, she lived in the projects and it was like one of 8 kids, whatever, but she became an English teacher and she had a perfect accent. And she was old. So she said, Monica, my dear girl, my father gave each and every one of his children a copy of Bastiat's The Law.
Really?
For his or her 12th birthday. And I was like, I think I absorbed that just culturally in the house. But I mean, it resonated with me because it had such an influence on her and my father that they never told me to read it, but that was how I was raised according to the principles there. And I guess, I know this is going to sound crazy. I mean, I literally have 1,000 books. Virus Mania would be a good one right now. But I think if I had to be on a desert island and only have one book with me, I think it would be War and Peace.
War and Peace. Still haven't. That's been a dust collector on my shelf along with Tragedy and Hope. I got to crack it one of these days.
You have to read the first 200 pages twice. But, I like the ending.
Excellent.
The whole thing was good. But I just feel like, it's a funny question because I read constantly, and the way I'm not like a big reader. It's not like I read a book a day, but what happens with books for me is I'll read a book, and even if it's like transformational, like the most profound book I've ever read ever, there's only so much you can change or absorb in yourself, in your mind, in your life. So, the Yoga Sutras was like that. I read that, it was like, oh my God, wow. And then you have to let most of it go, but like something remains. And then every other book has kind of that kind of effect. So for me, I feel like you have to read them all. Every book that appeals to you. And I buy them all. And I'm going to I call myself the librarian of the tunnels. So if I never get a vaccination again, and they make me live outside in the outlands or in the tunnels, like every dystopian sci-fi, I literally have 1,000 books, and I'm going to bring them. And I only buy the books that I am afraid they're gonna burn. So that's why I can't tell you the book I want to recommend because they're gonna burn it.
That's good. That's good. I will put it in the description on Odyssey only. This way, people have to go to alternative media to check it out. To check it out on Odyssey. It'll be in that description. There is a great Twilight. The tech. Oh. Yeah, that's the guy we were just talking about. The Technological Society by Jack Lowell. I will have to
that
check.
Propaganda stuff is on page 363 and following.
Yeah, one of the worst Twilight Zones I ever saw. This guy is dying to read. He just wants to read his books, and everyone's bullying him, and his wife is rude, and his boss says, stop reading. You're on the clock. So he goes in to the safe and he's reading, and there's like an avalanche and it kills everyone. And then he lines up his books. He goes, this I'm going to read in March, this in April. Everyone's dead on the planet Earth. And now he has time to read, and he sits down and his glasses break and now he can't see anything. And then it ends. And I go, that was the worst thing ever. Because I pictured myself, I go, oh my God, what if I just had like a month where I could just read? That would be so cool. That was the most heartbreaking scene of anything I've ever seen ever.
Me too. And there's a favorite Twilight Zone for people where it's the guy who stands up for himself in the end, and it's at the end of a long table. It's a real famous actor. I don't know if it was like, it wasn't My Favorite Martian, but it was somebody like that. And it's just like everyone's favorite Twilight Zone. And whenever anyone describes it, like they're like, oh, you know that Twilight Zone, the Twilight Zone for like libertarians. I'm like, the one where he breaks his glasses? Like, it traumatized me my entire life. I was like, and I literally to this day have like 15 pairs of glasses, and I wonder if that's why. Like, I just cannot. There's always an extra pair of glasses here. See, right here. There's always an extra pair of glasses.
I swear, traumatizing is the right word, because you go, finally, he wins. He's left alone. He can now educate himself, and his glasses break, and it was the worst. So, I'm glad. I'm glad you've seen that.
So then we'd have to be the sages of the poets or the bards of the tunnels. We'd have to remember them. Yikes!
Oh my gosh, that sounds exhausting. Everyone, check out thepropreport.com, link in the description below. If you want to see that secret book, check out odyssey.com and find this video there. Ms. Perez, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.